Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1048 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Man, part of this chapter was legendary. It just was. Kaido, what he did, how he went about it, I puts Kaido on another level in terms of One Piece villains. Another level meaning the very, very top tier. I know that a lot of people had already been saying that about Kaido, that Kaido is tier 1, but after this chapter, it is not a debate. The moment where Kaido turns into a fire dragon and he burns Luffy's arm and he tells Luffy, hey, you could just let go of me. I am not going anywhere. I'm going to take whatever you throw at me head on and we'll see who's stronger. It hit me like a freaking truck. For me, this is on par with, as far as villains are concerned, the very best moments that we've gotten from any villain ever. Katakuri stabbing himself immediately comes to mind. I mean, I just love it when Oda is able to flex his villains and give them moments where you're not actually rooting for them. You don't want them to win, but they do something that makes you appreciate them as adversaries. In that moment, Kaido was just as cool, if not cooler than Luffy. This is one thing I feel like a lot of other stories mess up. And they mess up because, their characters are too black and white. Their villains are too black. And it takes away these moments where you can be impressed by their character and not just their sheer power. But on the other side of the coin, for as awesome as this moment was, and really the majority of the chapter, I even loved the flashback moments building up to the end. The end itself, I don't think that I felt as much as I thought that I would have, or maybe that Oda intended. So everybody gets it, you get it, I get it. We're at the nitpicky section of the arc here, but little details, for me, go a long way to make sure that I'm in the right mindset for whatever's happening. And things that stick out can really unimmerse me from the story. And that's how I feel about Denjiro currently. I'm still optimistic that there might be something more with him, but I can't be so confident to say that there must be something else. But the big thing with Denjiro is that he was just gone. He was literally gone for like 50 chapters. Maybe it wasn't that much. Maybe 35 chapters. And he just appears here at the very nick of time when Hiyori refuses to defend herself to finish Orochi off. I don't know, man. There's so many things compounding into this moment that I feel as if Oda has some sort of moral or thematic reason for the things that occurred, but in terms of the actual story, didn't satisfy me. But a component of all of this is what the hell has Denjiro been doing literally the entire fight? Everybody has been giving it their all, more than their all. There's been fights to the brink, fights to the death, and Denjiro seemingly has been unscathed. And it feels as if in this moment, and this may not be true, in fact I kind of expect it to not be true, but I don't want to definitively say that, but it feels like Oda didn't know what to do with Denjiro for that time. It was like he had this idea, okay, Denjiro is going to be the one to finish off Orochi, but he had nothing in the middle. So after reading, I have to sort of take a step back and kind of reorganize this for myself, basically. Essentially convince myself that Denjiro had to be doing something because that's the way that I need it to be in order for it to work for me. If Denjiro is literally standing there, whistling to himself while all this calamity is taking place, or even worse, because this is somewhat plausible, he's just been fighting scrubs the entire time, right? That would be immensely disappointing. But it takes a while to sort of reorient myself to this, because it's not, you read it first and then you're like, okay, Denjiro appeared out of the blue and hasn't been doing anything, and then you think about it afterwards, which is unfortunate. I think that in an ideal world, and this is obviously easier said than done, in an ideal world there's always a placeholder. That everything that is happening with all the characters always is exciting, and the subversions to that only make it more so. But I would say the best approximation for a placeholder that we have for Dendro is that he has been fighting scrubs. It does help though that not only has he not been in the story, like a focal point in the story, but he's literally been absent for 35 chapters, which does better reaffirm or affirm my belief in the mystery, that there's actual mystery here. Mystery that we can get excited for. I think the other problem is that I'm not really sure what important thing that he could have possibly been doing. Like, it would be helpful, even if it was wrong, to have some sort of idea in mind, a theory, an idea. Like, there's something that just intuitively occurs to you, oh, that Dendro must have been doing that. That's what he's been doing the entire time, and I think that would totally change my perspective. But as of now, nothing really stands out to me other than kind of, it feels like, well, he had to have been doing something important. Even though I have no idea what that was. Some sort of Mr. Prince moment. It's gonna be revealed and come about in the conclusion in some way. But yeah, after several years of analyzing and reviewing One Piece, this is just something that I've noticed that occasionally Oda does, in my opinion, fumble at. Sometimes the choices he makes relies a little bit too heavily upon trust. Like, it's not just important what happens. A cool moment, sometimes it is, but sometimes a cool moment isn't just cool by itself. You need the journey to it. And in the case of Orochi's death, the journey for Orochi was very good. But the feeling I should have for Dendro having done it should have been stronger. Part of the reason that it's not, I think, is because we were given very little insight for Dendro's journey to this moment. I mean, we know how he felt 20 years ago, we know how he felt for Odin, but the actual, like, stakes in the battle, like, just as a hypothetical, imagine this, like, Dendro had a 1v1 opponent from Kaido and Orochi's side. And we got that battle during the fight, but it ends in a cliffhanger, and you don't know whether Dendro won or lost, right? And then you come back to this moment where he climatically appears and cuts Orochi's head off. Immediately, you know what he's been doing, he's been in this fight, and then there's a resolution to what occurred, he won, and instead of like, oh, here's Dendro finally, you feel like, oh yes, he survived. You know, that's maybe not the best example in the world, but already I feel like it would be better this way. This can work in a variety of different ways depending on what Oda had Dendro do during this time, but all of it essentially required more screen time, or at least some screen time. So this scene from Orochi's perspective I thought was really great, but from Dendro's perspective was not as much. At least now he has done something, and hopefully we have some promise for the future. I hope to see some more. But the other issue that I have with this scene, or other critique, is with Hiyori. Hiyori kind of suffers from the same problem as Dendro. We got some hints from earlier in Onigashima that Hiyori might be here. We saw what we assumed to be her silhouette early, and she was taking care of the scabbards. And then we see her makeup fully done somehow in Orochi's room, just sort of sitting there. And the battle is unfolding around them, and there's just a sense that she is not living in the same universe as everyone else. Again, it lends itself to the feeling that Oda had an idea of the finishing point for both Dendro and Hiyori, but didn't know what to do with them in the middle. So again, just like Dendro, it's important that you feel satisfied that Orochi has died. You feel led up to that moment. But it is also important that you feel satisfied by the characters who are actually participating in this moment, and I'm still not sure that I understand Hiyori at all. Going back to earlier in Wano, Hiyori had a really cool conversation with Zoro where she revealed to him that she wanted to be the one to take Orochi's life. I thought that this moment was gripping, and it promised a lot for the future, and it told you something about her. From our vantage and from her vantage, she wasn't deemed as very important. She wasn't sent to the future like Momonosuke, most of the other scabbards. She was forgotten, and she wants to play a part. She wants to be involved. She wants to be important. And when Dendro came in at the last moment to essentially do everything for her, I feel a conflict of message. She wanted to be involved, yet she sat in a room and played an instrument while there was so much to do. Now don't get me wrong, this could have been important. Like the very small things that came together in order to make this scene, it could all have purpose and reason to it that we don't fully understand quite yet. But I feel like in the lead up to all of this, everything that Oda has done has worked against Hiyori's interests. Right? It's important to her to kill Orochi. Well, killing Orochi became infinitely less important during the fight in Onigashima. Essentially from the moment that he was beheaded, Kaido made it a point, and as a reader you understood, like, Orochi is nothing without Kaido. It's emphasized once again in this chapter, Orochi by himself is nothing. Personally, that's how I understood the Scabbard's interactions with Orochi. They all basically disregarded him. They ignored him. He was not even worthy of a moment worth of their attention, or maybe that was all he was worthy of, because they cut off a head and then just moved on. If you want to save Wano, if you want to do good to the people, then defeat Kaido, and then everything will work from there. So already I feel like Hiyori's interests are being undermined. And then you have the actual act of doing it. Now you could argue that Hiyori actually did kill Orochi, or at least was going to kill Orochi, because he pretty much stated as much, like, I'm about to die and I'm going to take you with me, so Orochi was going to die with or without Dendro's help. But you also kind of feel like this moment was stolen from her. So I want to make sure that I say this clearly so that I'm not misunderstood and that there's no crossing signals here. But, you know, it's like, so what's the point of everything that I'm saying? Well, essentially I'm saying that there has to be more to Hiyori's story. I feel like there has to be. And I'm not certain if it's something that can be accomplished quickly. Oda has done basically everything in his power to diminish the importance of Hiyori's motivations, and when the time comes to actually do it, Oda has Dendro act as a substitute. I personally interpret this as there's something very wrong with Hiyori's motivations. Basically, Oda is saying that what Hiyori wanted is not what she should have. Going back to the conversation with Zoro, what she tells him is, I want to kill Orochi. I want to be the one to kill Orochi. But you would think, right, for a protagonist character, that she would be more focused on the well-being of Wano. I want to see these people prosper. I want them to eat healthy food and drink clean water and free them. But she seems focused on revenge. Revenge that we now know is totally insignificant. We know that for a fact because the Scabbards literally didn't care. Because if you defeat Kaido, then Orochi's got nowhere to go. He's doomed anyway. She then spends the majority of the battle focused on revenge when there was so much more she could potentially do. I almost feel as if Oda's message with Dendro is Dendro's soul is already mutilated beyond comprehension. His soul is already dead. And so he saved her from doing the same to her own by being the one to kill Orochi. But at the very least, I think that you can see how her character arc is very inconclusive and unclear at this point. If, you know, this was all Oda had intended for Hiyori, then I don't see the dots lining up. In order for them to do that, you need to bring this around full circle and actually teach her a moral or lesson in some way, or at least make it obvious to the readers what you were doing, which would require time and circumstances which I'm not sure of. But either way, this definitely contributed to my experience as I'm reading the chapter, because I feel like there needs to be more for both Hiyori and Dendro, but the scene is laid out to be something climactic and final, especially in context with what Luffy is going through with Kaido. Feels like the end of the battle, where you wouldn't expect more story, you know, afterwards. So these things I don't think complement each other. It doesn't mean that Oda doesn't have a plan, and Oda could still fake us out and there could be much more to the Kaido and Luffy fight. But Oda is relying on trust that it will all work out. Because what's actually given in the story, which you are supposed to assume is not the best for either Denjiro or Hiyori's character. But anyway, this leads to another thing which is curious and confusing to me. Like, the fact of Orochi's death is definitely noteworthy to the people of Wano who have suffered at his hands for 20 years. He's been insanely cruel. But the one who everyone is going to believe is actually responsible for Orochi's death is Kaido, not Denjiro and Hiyori. Denjiro and Hiyori have killed Orochi in a room with nobody else, nobody is watching, nobody is caring. Meanwhile, everyone assumed that Orochi had already died because he had a public beheading at center stage. Partly I can see this being an intentional choice on Oda's part to not romanticize killing. That's something that Oda has repeatedly done throughout the story. You'll notice that the heroes don't kill people. So if Orochi has really died, and based on all lore about his Devil Fruit, I would assume that he has actually died, right? Then Oda wouldn't want Denjiro and Hiyori for this moment to really be heroic. This is actually a thought that I really like. But on the other hand, I feel lacking because I think that Orochi needs to be held accountable by all the people that he wronged, and not just in an isolated room with two incredibly vengeful protagonists. It always made more sense to me to sort of not necessarily kill Orochi, but hold him up and show him the people that he's harmed and make him sort of acknowledge them. Now, of course, if Ghost Piece happens and we're still waiting, but now it's like, the sweat is on. But with Ghost Piece, that could be a way in which that happens, where you see the process of the souls of the dead go into the afterlife. So then Orochi, even though he may have died, his role in the story may not be, and he may be confronted by the souls of all the other people that he's killed, to get the kind of retribution that I feel like he really deserves. But barring that, it's in a way a very anticlimactic end for him. But yeah, I have not given up on Ghost Piece yet. Not yet. No. Side note, I read the chapter with the scene with Kinemon and Kiku, and Usopp drops him. Oh no, don't be dead. Like, it's things like that where, I don't want to invest too much in this because I've been there before, where you invest fully in a theory, but it's just a theory, and then it's not true, and then you don't want to disappoint yourself. But at the same time, I can't stop. So I'm hoping now with Orochi actually having died, right, this leads into an afterlife thing. And then you have the scene with Kiku and Kinemon where we're just supposed to be like, oh yeah, of course they're still alive. But Oda is bringing it up again, which is a little bit conspicuous, don't you think? And I think all this really relates to the overall feeling of the chapter. The chapter makes you feel like Luffy is going to win. Most every sign points in that direction, and I think that you will find not too many people argue otherwise. This is where we stand right now, and I want to make this clear, right, that it could just be the end of the battle, but if there is a twist, this is akin to, again, right before Lucci and Khalifa and Bluno are revealed as the agents of CP9 in Water 7. The moment before they were revealed, if you had tried to speculate them as the spies, you would have been laughed at because it's so absurd, because we literally saw them die. So you had to jump through significant hoops to speculate what was the correct thing, and that's honestly incredible storytelling, and the way that I would recommend Oda do it every single time. And so we're here now with this. Of course, it could end with this punch, and then, Luffy wins. But if the punch does not finish Kaido, or something strange happens, right, at this moment, you can't speculate it. Therefore, I will be speculating it. You think we play by the rules? No. And then watch my credibility trickle down the drain. But yeah, if anything here, call this a gut feeling. I think that there is simply too much that Oda needs to do before the end of Wano to make sure that everything has a satisfying conclusion for this to be the final. Obviously, this was the point of spending a long time talking about Denjiro and Hiyori. Both of their character arcs don't make too much sense to me. Doesn't feel congruous, doesn't feel coherent, and it doesn't seem to really serve a purpose. But if you go back and you look at all these arcs, you can see the characters that Oda had, what they represented, what they brought to the story, and how it was paid off. So despite the fact that the arc is already this long, I'm not going to put aside these expectations just because it feels like the end. But anyway, recently we talked about the rule of Denjiro. Denjiro needs to do something. Well, he's done something. I'm still not satisfied, but at least he's done something. So it appears as if Oda's going down the checklist, so let me do the same. Another thing which I feel like needs to be addressed before Kaido goes down is whatever role that Oda planned for Cursed Swords in this arc. We started off the arc with Luffy grabbing the Katetsu blade and, that whole thing. And then it disappeared and something has to happen with that, right? Like, why else would we be bringing this up at all? And speaking of swords, Oda took the time and gave Momonosuke one of Odin's blades. The other one, aside from Enma, Ame no Habakiri. You assume at some point that Momo having this sword should play some sort of role. And I think the biggest one of all is the Kaido flashback. This is just something that strikes me as very odd. Now this could totally happen, and it's kind of unique, but I'm not sure if it's a good thing or not. Like, we got a new chapter, and essentially 15 seconds of the fight elapsed, right? It was all flashback, and the actual movement of the conflict between Kaido and Luffy changed very little, if at all. I kind of expect that again, because we need a Kaido flashback, I feel like, before he loses, or as he loses, maybe, where we can learn about who he was as a kid, maybe about rocks, or his devil fruit. Big Mom gave him his devil fruit, why it's important, these kinds of things as well. This punch is going to stretch out for eternity, it feels like. Also, if we're assuming that Luffy is about to win, it seems unlikely that he's going to pummel the island and crush all the people of the Flower Capital, which means that Momonosuke is probably going to have to move the island, which itself would require a lot of screen time, or at least some as well. So these are definitely some things which give me pause. I still think that all of this goes a bit smoother if this isn't the last punch, that there will be another one. But as always, those are just my thoughts that nobody has paid for and only a few people want. We'll see what Oda has in store for us. In the meantime, I know that most of this review was critical. I think that there was a lot of really cool things from the chapter. I liked that Orochi was a fire dragon, but the fire was actually a bad thing, it was killing him, while Kaido became a fire dragon and kind of used it as a weapon. The contrast there was probably significant. I know that we hardly mentioned the actual flashback at all, mainly because I felt like it was a lot of things that we already knew sort of repackaged, but I think that repackaging was necessary. It was a great emotional buildup, a reminder to get us in the moment, the feel of why Orochi's defeat mattered. We've already talked about in length Kaido and how legendary everything about him was in this chapter, but what we haven't talked about is the fallout of him becoming a fire dragon. We can see in the chapter he literally melts one of the horns on the skull of Onigashima. I mean, it was like watching Godzilla from those movies recently, where there's a scene where Godzilla gets supercharged and everything around him begins to melt. Kaido is doing that. And so it makes Onigashima, it turns it into a boiling pot, which we've been wondering what Oda's going to do with the water. I mean, that's what he can do with the water. He can literally boil everyone alive with Kaido's heat, which is also a problem if Luffy punches him down, I would think. So Momo has to move the island, but until then, it should get really hot. And although I can't find the exact words right now, there's obviously something poetic and symbolic about all of these warriors, and even the enemies as well, Kaido's subordinates, taking the same fate as Odin. But more than anyone else, I feel it's significant for the Scabbards, because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to jump into the pot with Odin, and Odin told them, no, it's not yet time, basically. So here we are, maybe with some similar circumstances. And lastly, I know that I can't be the only person that is actually more hyped about the cover story after this chapter than the last one. In the last one, right, everyone and their mother speculated that the Blackbeard pirates had arrived to Chocolate Town. And I thought, well, the more obvious explanation, this is a cover story about the Vinsmoke. Likely, we're not going to deviate with Blackbeard pirates here. It's going to be focused on the Vinsmoke, so it's Ichiji and Reiju. And then we get this cover story where, rather than actually seeing the two in Whole Cake Island, it's instead posed as a question. Brule is assuming, is Germa trying to infiltrate Chocolate Town again? Which kind of makes you think that it may not be them, which would then validate maybe some thoughts that it could actually be the Blackbeard pirates. Or I guess the other way of looking at this maybe is that maybe Ichiji and Reiju aren't trying to infiltrate anything. I guess put in the plainest terms possible, this cover story has me feeling like subversion is incoming. So maybe Germa has appeared, but maybe not in the way that we were anticipating. Maybe not to infiltrate or to headstrong attack the island. Maybe they've come to beg their siblings to be released. Maybe we'll see some character growth, right? To take a page from Sanji's book, his kindness, right? That's the whole point of Whole Cake Island. So you would assume it to have some influence on the Vinsmoke. Certainly Reiju is capable, and Ichiji would be the big question mark. But yeah, either way, I cannot wait to find out. I'm really invested in this cover story. I think that either way that you look at this, like the next one is going to be great. But yeah, that's what I have to say about this chapter. Obviously, still really exciting time. Not exactly sure what's going to happen, but we'll find out. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you notice something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.